Thank you for watching this Last Mile Profits video.
What's new in the UK out-of-home market? Keep watching to find out more.
Last Mile Profits is brought to you by Parcel Pending by Quadient.
Hello, everyone. Gary is back. And today, we're going to be talking about something close to his heart, the UK market for out-of-home. How about that, Gary?
Sounds good to me. I'm actually in the UK at the moment, so it is my home market at the minute.
Perfect. Well, look, Gary, let's just sort of go through what's been happening because it's really been happening. My understanding is InPost now has something like 15,000 lockers. Royal Mail, do you remember Kretinsky was talking about 20,000? They're not quite there. I think they're probably around about 3.5. But they got quite a lot of PUDOs. They claim over 21,000, probably a large part of those being Collect Plus related.
Yeah, I think it's 11,300 post offices and 8,000 or so Collect Plus. So yeah, so you stick all that together, they're comfortably north of 20k.
But Evri has unveiled plans to reach 25,000 out-of-home points by 2030. And then just to sort of round things up, Quadient has revealed it's embarking on a review of its locker business. I haven't got a clue what that is. Maybe you'll have some ideas.
Well, definitely. I mean, I think there's a definite sense that this is becoming a normal thing in the UK, that out-of-home delivery is touching the majority. Not sure if you've seen it. I think it's hot off the press. The Citizens Advice Bureau have just published their first out-of-home report, a sign of normalisation in itself. And one of the headlines is 76% of respondents have used an out-of-home service. Even bigger than that, for me, was 25% of respondents said they used it for their last delivery. So this isn't like looking back over 100 deliveries and getting to 76%. This is something that people are doing right now.
And Gary, I think I'm preaching to the converted, but this had to happen because as e-commerce grows, the UK is one of the most developed markets in terms of e-commerce in the world and certainly in Europe. So, the writing was on the wall. But, I mentioned some figures in terms of the various players. And, if I were to summarize, unsurprisingly, InPost is the king when it comes to lockers today. But if you take number of access points in total, well, Evri and Royal Mail are doing pretty well. What's your feeling? Is it going to change? Are we going to end up with everyone having lockers? Is it doable? How could it work?
Well, I think there's a race for kind of the big players to get a decent locker footprint down. So Evri and Royal Mail look across at InPost and are definitely chasing it. And the three of them are fighting over what are probably the two biggest chunks of parcel volume in the UK. One of them is obviously Vinted. We've done a lot of videos and we talk about Vinted a lot, but the three of them split their volume. It's a huge volume. I'm hearing 2 million a week each for the three carriers. So this is adding up to hundreds of millions of items a year. And the other one is a really cool one, actually. I saw it on LinkedIn today. InPost UK are advertising a whole load of jobs. And one of them is a key account manager and must be a fluent Mandarin speaker. So that tells you another really important source of volume. So everyone's attention is pointing far, far east. InPost, Evri included, and I know Royal Mail have got a China team. They've had it for a long time. If you haven't got a workable strategy for those two at a very low cost, you're going to struggle in the market.
And surprise, surprise, Gary, to get a very low cost, there's only one way to do it, to have a very efficient out-of-home network.
Yeah, so instead of, no matter how big these networks get, 15,000, 18,000, 25,000, it's still going to be 1,000th of the number of home delivery points. I think there's 27 million home addresses in the UK you've got to deliver to, and basically delivery is random. You could be going to any one of them any day. It's very hard to plan, very hard to control cost when you're doing that. And we both well know that if you've got a solid established network of lockers bolted to the ground, you know where they are, you're going there every day, 25,000 is much easier to service than 25 million.
Well, delicately speaking. But then, Gary, look, it's clear that InPost is going to do what they typically do. They'll do their own thing. They're at 15K now. Wouldn't be at all surprised if we're at 2025 in the not too distant future. So that is going to be one of the networks. Amazon, not quite as big, but relatively big, but they're closed as a network and do their own thing as well. The question I've got is, Daniel Kretinsky mentioned 20,000 lockers. Evri's been mooting that they want to do something with lockers. DPD is actively looking at opportunities. But is there really space for three other networks, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, you mentioned briefly the changes, the potential changes at Quadient with their open network. DPD's network, almost kind of like by default, is the Yeep network. Yeep are comfortably north of 3,000 locations now, but they're dependent on DPD volume predominantly to try to get usage out of them. So at the moment, there are quite a few runners and riders. The question is, and you've asked it before, and now we're careful because we're sponsored by them, but Quadient could be one of the companies that gets squeezed in the middle of all of this. If Evri are racing to do their own lockers, Royal Mail are racing to do their own lockers, what's the role of an open network if everybody else is doing their own thing? So that might be, and I genuinely don't know, and I'm speculating, one of the questions that's being asked inside Quadient as they look at this restructure, which, if you look at their press release, says including the potential disposal of parts of the business. So how this goes, I don't know.
Well, yeah, and the thing from my perspective, let's look at two separate items. So one is open network. Open network, which relates to cell rental, which is the model that pretty much everyone is using today. It's really hard to make that work. And I'll tell you why, in my opinion, and maybe this could be interesting because you might have a different view. But if you're making your 30, 40, 50 pence, whatever it is, for renting a locker cell, it's really hard because the courier has to go to that locker, pay the stop cost, pay the incremental locker cost. And because there'll be several different couriers, although maybe he'll have one or two parcels, it's not going to be the sort of volumes that an InPost courier would have. So the economics aren't going to work. In my opinion, the only way for a genuine, agnostic, open network to be able to be effective for the carriers and to make some money is if it's end to end. So what I mean by that is, instead of 4 or 5 different couriers going to the locker, with the exception of failed deliveries where you have to have that option, the majority of the parcels are injected into one injection point and then efficiently delivered by one courier to the lockers, achieving an efficiency similar to what someone like InPost would have. I don't see any other way. Or have I missed something?
I think you've mentioned this theory before, but and it's a great theory, but it depends on lots of players playing nicely together. And I don't know how likely they are to play nicely together in such a collaborative way as you describe. Or you end up with, if you've got 4 carriers sharing the locker, you end up with a 5th organization doing the consolidation distribution. And as we both know, every time somebody touches a parcel, the chance of anybody making a profit out of it is reduced. So it's just how many times does it get touched before it gets there? But I hear what you're saying. It's definitely on people's minds, I think.
Because what is the alternative, Gary? So I hear what you're saying, but the reality is there don't need to be so many touch points. If a large van delivers several thousand parcels to an injection point for network A, the stop cost is almost zero. If you've got good scan compliance, then you should be covered. But what's the alternative? The alternative is that Evri sets up their own network with, to be relevant, you're going to have to talk 10,000 plus machines. DPD does the same thing. Who else is the Americans? I think will have to probably settle for working with somebody. Royal Mail obviously has to do the same thing. And then you get, replicated lockers. I did some filming with Gregor recently in Warsaw, and one of the first, I think it's actually online now on LinkedIn if anyone's interested. One of the first shots we had were, 4 lockers bang next to each other, which is about as inefficient as you can possibly be. So the alternative, if we're saying that, and I understand that, it requires cooperation, partnership, and getting things right, but the alternative also sucks.
Yeah, but I don't see any of these large organisations in the UK changing their tune and suddenly saying, well, actually, we're going to become super collaborative and we're not going to put our own lockers down, because it's, I'm involved with a couple of these organisations and they're fighting for space, they're fighting for footprint. Some have got ahead of the game, some are late to the game, but they're not backing off and thinking, actually, this is crazy, we should all be sharing. I see literally the opposite. I see no appetite for sharing networks whatsoever. I think they imagine there'll be winners and losers. With Evri and Royal Mail have got huge out of home volume. Amazon have got huge volume. I don't know how much goes out of home, but I believe Collect Plus have seen really, really good growth from both their Amazon relationship, which I think is now 11,000 shops, and their Royal Mail relationship, which is now north of 8,000. So shops seem to be an area where sharing is good and sharing works. Lockers, I'm not seeing any evidence that it's been adopted in the way you describe.
And you're right, by the way. And I'll actually do a bit of predicting. So I'll open my crystal ball. We are, after all, last mile
But
profits.
actually, I'm
And I'm gonna
borrowing my wife's dressing room, and she has a crystal ball. So if you want to borrow this one, I can lend it to you. But carry on.
thank you, Gary. So I'll, across the airwaves, I'll be looking at this crystal ball, and it's all happened in Poland. The best possible thing that could happen to InPost was exactly that. The competition created their own fiefdoms. They didn't cooperate. It's slowly happening now through Allegro, the biggest e-commerce player in Poland, but it's not like for like. And I think that probably, Gary, we'll meet in 3 or 4 years' time, and it's going to be a very similar situation where we're going to have 4 or 5, or maybe 2 or 3 large networks that are not large enough to directly compete with InPost, who will be everywhere. There'll be a sort of, let's say, ersatz solution, but it's not going to be quite the same. And the people that are going to be raking it in will be InPost if the competition decide to do it that way.
Well, it's very possible. Or the other alternative is you might see some consolidation. The markets are consolidating all the time. How many home delivery providers does one market need? You've seen Evri basically absorbing DHL e-commerce, which was the old UK mail business. Some of these huge organizations have got the capacity and the capital to soak up some of the small regional players. So you might just see organizations literally disappearing. 3 or 4 years' time, you might see a red and yellow logo outside the Every building rather than a blue one.
Well, look, Gary, I think we're out of time, but it would be great to hear if our readers and viewers even have got a different view. Maybe there's something we've missed. Unfortunately, I'm with you that although I don't think it makes financial or really long-term business logic, that we will end up with the individual networks until one of them just ceases to be able to do this effectively. And that's the point at which they'll be forced to do something. But that's never really the best way.
No, that'd be
But
very
Gary,
something.
it was great to have you back, and looking forward to a few more editions.
Gary, I was looking at the subscriptions and realized that a huge number of our audience actually don't subscribe to watch our videos.
Really? That's outrageous. It's a bit like watching the BBC without your TV license. How can we keep it free if people aren't subscribing and letting us know they want more of this content? It's ridiculous.
And on top of that, if they're not subscribed, they don't get information about the latest hot episode where you can make one of your witty jokes and we can talk about something that is really important for our industry.
If I knew that a single act like that would make sure I got maximum time taking the mickey out of you, I'd be hitting subscribe in a heartbeat.
Well, look, so here we have it. Please, everyone, if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your opportunity. Click right now. The button should be there, or maybe there. Do it now and have it done.